Hi, I'm Steve Neal, and this is Timbo. Thanks for joining us here on A Catastrophic Event, where we strive to save lives through education. Today, my guest is Chris Stoehner, owner of XSA, Integrated Firearms Instruction. In this episode, Chris shares his thoughts on whether a firearm is the right way to handle the massive increase in crime across the country. He speaks to those still on the fence about getting a firearm, things to think about when you do, and the training you need to stay proficient in their use. Hi, I'm Steve Neal, and welcome to A Catastrophic Event. This episode is about self-defense, why you need it, and what to look for in your training needs. The first reason to consider training is the U.S. is no longer Mayberry. Violent crime is rising in every part of the country, in every category of crime. Reflect on this. A burglary occurs every 15 seconds in the U.S. today. Over half of those burglaries are home invasions, meaning someone is at home when it happens. Of those home invasions, over 60% result in physical or sexual assault. Violent crime is surging 44%, with over 6 million instances in 2022, and an American being raped every 68 seconds. Violent crime against children ages 12 to 17 doubled, and crime is also rising in America's schools, with almost 860,000 cases and over 67% of public schools reporting having at least one assault during the 2021 to 22 school year. Another thing to consider is that, at least on the surface, Americans are doing fine. Food, jobs, shelter, and medical care are available. But what happens should these become unavailable? Things could get dicey very quickly. That is where self-defense training comes in, whether it's non-lethal like learning a martial art, boxing, or how to use firearms safely and effectively. Education on how to protect yourself and your family and your possessions is becoming a matter of life and death. Chris, my guest from XSA International, is a veteran, and they are a veteran-owned and operated firearms safety and training company based in Pondray, Idaho. He is here to help us with this topic. So, what we're going to do is we're going to ask a series of questions, and the first one is, what do you say to those who are interested in buying firearms for self-defense, but are still a little hesitant?
Well, I would say that the first thing that you need to do is you need to look into finding appropriate training. We tend to think that because we can pull triggers that makes us shooters, and that's not necessarily the case, especially whenever it comes to incidents of critical stress and stress management. We have an understanding that our fundamentals of marksmanship can deteriorate by up to 80% under critical stress. And so what that means is if I go to a shooting range and my entire target pattern is, 18 inches by 18 inches wide, whenever you open up that target pattern as a result of critical stress, you're now missing your target, as well as we have to learn to be able to discriminate our target, making sure that understanding our firearm safety rules, that number 4 firearm safety rules, to know your target, to be able to positively identify it, know what's in front of the target, know what's beyond the target. I have to be a disciplined shooter, and what that means is if I see something in the backdrop that is going to risk me hitting somebody that is beyond my target, I need to be disciplined enough to either understand how to make angles and distance for that target and or be disciplined enough not to take that shot. I tend to recommend for people that if you are interested in buying a firearm and you're not really sure what type of firearm to get, I recommend that you rent the firearm first. The reason being is, firearms feel much different out on the shooting range than they do whenever you're standing in front of a high pressure salesman. Most gun owners don't understand that gun store, they're trying to make a profit. and they're trying to make a profit off of you purchasing that firearm. So they don't necessarily have any investment in you with what kind of firearm that you're buying.
Okay, actually, what you're saying makes sense. Amanda Ripley, in her book, The Unthinkable, she has, in one of her examples on disasters or whatever things that happen, she has a firearm instructor in there, and he talks about exactly what you said, that in those, he gave an example as a terrorist situation, and people were abducted, and he had to go in there and rescue them, or he was part of the group that went in there and rescued them, and how that the stress of that situation affects your ability to think, to use the firearm safely and correctly, and so yeah, training is definitely something you need to do in any area for stress. You need to get ahead of the curve, think about it beforehand, and that way you have a better chance of going through it safely. So what tips can you offer to help novices select the right firearm for their needs?
Number one, have a clear definition about what those needs are. What is this intended purpose for this firearm, right? Competition pistols are going to perform vastly differently than a self-defense pistol. You need to have an understanding of what the action of the trigger is. The action of the trigger is defined as what is the job of the trigger. In certain weapon systems, the trigger of the firearm is responsible not only for making the gun discharge, but also for cocking the hammer. So for a double action pistol, the trigger's job is to cock the hammer and then to release the hammer forward to start the concussive process of actually discharging the firearm. What that typically means is that on a double action pistol, your trigger pull is going to be a lot harder than it would be if you were to have a single action pistol. I tend, as a firearms instructor that teaches a lot of use of force as well as self-defense, the idea behind the type of firearm that I want to use in a self-defense action is going to be a single action trigger with no external mechanical safeties. And that's one less thing that I have to worry about training to that standard to remove the physical safety. Now, I understand that there are a lot of people out there that are very hesitant to use a firearm that doesn't have an external mechanical safety, say for example like a Glock or a Springfield XD. So they will revert to something that does have a external mechanical safety. And if that's the case, then you just have to train yourself to the standard of using that mechanical safety so that you can actually press a trigger and discharge a firearm. And that typically means going out to the range on a regular basis. If you're carrying inside the waistband and you're concealing that weapon, having the knowledge, forethought, and process of being able to actually clear your overgarment to draw the weapon from a concealed position. And I tend to advocate for concealed carry as opposed to open carry because one of the tenets that we teach for success is speed, surprise, and violence of action. In carrying open, it tends to take away that element of surprise.
Well, that makes total sense. So, are you saying that, I mean, you'd rather use a single action than a double action?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would prefer to use a single action over a double action any day.
How about a semi-automatic?
Same. So you can get single action and double action pistols, whether that's in a revolver or that's in a semi-automatic pistol.
I did not know that.
Yep. So for example, the SIG 250 is a double action only, wherein the SIG 226 is a double and single action. So you can manually cock the hammer so that you've got a lighter trigger pull, or if you want to have that heavier trigger pull, you can actually leave the hammer forward and decocked, and that provides the double action. And then whenever the shot breaks and it cycles the slide and the next round is chambered, then you have a single action trigger.
Wow, that's amazing. I did not know that. You're teaching an old dog a new trick. So, what would you recommend for a woman looking for a firearm versus a man looking for a firearm? Is there a difference? What do you think?
The primary difference in what I recommend for women versus men for firearms is trigger press. That trigger pull for your trigger finger, the average man's finger is good for a greater amount of pounds of pressure on the trigger.
Okay.
As opposed to a woman is not going to have that same amount of strength necessarily. So again, going back to the concept of operations, before you buy a firearm, go to one of these gun stores that has a rental counter. Talk with them about the intended purpose for that firearm, whether that's going to be defensive, or that's going to be competition, or that's going to be sporting, and then actually shooting the gun. Typically, what I do whenever I run private pistol lessons for people that are buying or looking at buying a handgun for the first time, I take them, schedule them for the private lesson. I take them to the rental counter. I go through the rental counter and all the different applications of the pistols that are in the rental counter. And then we select 3 pistols that they think that they're going to like. And then when we go out onto the range to go live fire, we use a process of elimination where we have you shoot 5 rounds out of each handgun. And then through that process of elimination, you say, okay, I like this one, I like this one, I didn't like this one. So we've just disqualified one of the handguns. And then through the rest of the training, we go through those 2 pistols and you shoot a full magazine out of each pistol. And we start to talk about the qualities and the unique capabilities of each of the different handguns, as well as the limitations of those different handguns. And so by the end of that 2-hour lesson, you have a pretty good understanding of what it is that you're looking for in a handgun, and perhaps you've even settled on the idea of which handgun you want to actually purchase. So it helps you to make a more informed purchasing decision, as opposed to just randomly going up to a counter because you heard somebody on YouTube talk about this is the gun that you all have to have, and then that doesn't necessarily
Okay.
work for you and what your needs are.
So do you recommend a shotgun at all for home defense?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that no matter what kind of gun that you're shooting, overpenetration is going to be a real thing. So any type of firearm for home defense is going to be advantageous to not having a firearm. So if you're more comfortable with a shotgun because you grew up shooting clays as a kid, shotgun can be a great option. Knowing what type of ammunition to use in that shotgun is going to be paramount. And it's the exact same thing with a pistol or a rifle. Knowing what type of ammunition you're going to use and what the purpose of that intended ammunition is. As I mentioned to you previously, I just came from G9 ammunition in Post Falls, and G9 ammunition has got a lot of different proprietary rounds. They've got their external hollow point. It's meant to diffuse all of its energy within 18 inches of it being actually fired on a target. So the purpose of that is to help to limit overpenetration, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to limit its overpenetration. They also have ammunition that they manufacture specifically for being able to kill polar bears. And so if you're out there and you're hunting and you have a chance encounter with a grizzly bear, making sure that you have the right kind of ammunition in your pistol and or rifle so that you can actually stop that grizzly bear attack and be able to preserve yourself or preserve somebody else's life.
Several years ago, I talked to one of the sales representatives at White Elephant, which is a sporting goods store that used to be here in Spokane. And he was a former police trainer for here in Spokane County. And he told me in a shotgun, what you want is number 4 shot, because it's not going to go through somebody and go through the wall and hit somebody else as easily as something more powerful, but it will do the job. And just a tip I learned from him.
Yeah, I tend to tell people I don't care what you're shooting at me with, I don't want to get shot. So if that's birdshot, I don't want to get shot by it.
Right.
If that's a 22, I don't want to get shot by it.
Right. Well, of course, I'm not going to break into somebody's house, but still, you know. Okay, so let's see. What is the most important thing a beginner should learn about firearms training?
Number 1, safety. Safety. Anytime you're picking up a loaded weapon, and we always consider all guns always loaded, you have to understand that the Second Amendment industry doesn't want to talk about it a whole lot, but unloaded guns kill more people than we really give credence to. So we always consider that every gun is always loaded. We never point our gun at anything we're not willing to destroy. We keep our fingers straight and off the trigger until our sights are on target, and we've made the conscious decision to pull the trigger knowing that I am responsible for every single round that comes out of that gun. Out of my 9mm pistol, my bullet is traveling at a velocity of around 650 miles per hour. Once you press the trigger on that bullet, there's no taking it back, and you are absolutely accountable for every single shot that you take. And lastly, our 4 firearm safety rule is to know our target, to know what's beyond our target, to know what's in front of our target. Again, going back to the emphasis that you are responsible for every single bullet that you pull the trigger on. Beyond that, for a novice shooter, I tend to really enforce the idea of our 7 fundamentals of marksmanship, our stance, our grip to the pistol, our sight alignment, sight picture relationship, our breathing control, our trigger control, as well as our follow through. And inevitably I get calls from people that say, hey doc, I'd like to take one of your advanced courses. That is my litmus test for you to be able to take one of my advanced courses. Number one, can you tell me what your 4 firearm safety rules are? They're universal in all shooting sports. If you don't know your 4 firearm safety rules, can you be a safe shooter? Number 2, can you tell me and explain to me the relationship of your 7 fundamentals of marksmanship? Because if you don't know what your 7 fundamentals of marksmanship are, can you be a fundamental or a basic shooter? So if you don't know those 2 things, I tend to try to put you into either a private lesson so that I can fill the gaps in your education, or I have you attend one of our basic pistol courses, again for the same purpose of being able to fill the gaps in your firearms education. It just makes you a stronger shooter. Because the reality is that there's no such thing as an advanced shooter, not in my opinion anyways. In my opinion, we're all fundamental shooters. And the people that you find that are really, really capable and proficient shooters are people that execute the fundamentals of marksmanship in a safe manner very well.
So what are the 4 principles of safe shooting?
Yep, all guns are always loaded. Never point your gun at anything you're not willing to destroy. Keep your finger straight and off the trigger and your safety engaged until your sights are on target and you've made the conscious decision to pull the trigger. And finally, know what your target is. Know what's in front of it and know what's beyond it.
So, what do you think about laser devices for training, and do you prefer one over another?
Yeah, there's a lot of emphasis nowadays in the laser training systems, like the Mantis X. It's a great system. It is kind of costly, so it just depends on really what your intended focus is going to be. I tend to really emphasize for my students the necessity of dry fire, and so laser training systems can help to keep you mentally accountable for what you're actually doing. But I also tell people that my telephone with its smart camera can do the exact same thing. For example, I can tell you all day long, hey, you know what, you're doing this behind the gun, and you'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever, because you're not seeing it. So then I step back and I film you and I show you the video of what it is that you're doing and what I'm actually seeing, and then now there's no disputing it. So laser training devices are awesome. I actually use a SIRT pistol. It's modeled after a Glock 17, and it allows me to demonstrate to you in a very safe manner how I'm doing everything behind the gun, whether I'm showing you what I'm doing with my grip or whether I'm talking with you about trigger press, trigger control. All of that stuff is easier for me to show you on that SIRT pistol. Now, the cool thing about a SIRT pistol is it has a switch on the top of it so that it can actually show me your trigger take up. So if you're being really, really hasty on your trigger, or if you are over gripping the gun as you're pulling your trigger, it'll show me that downrange on the target. And then the second laser, whenever the trigger actually engages the laser, it shows me your intended point of aim, point of impact relationship. So yeah, there's a lot of value behind it. I tend to emphasize to people that dry fire is so important that it comprises 75% of all of my shooting. If I'm going to go out to the range and I'm going to shoot 50 rounds in a day, before I allow myself the liberty to load a single round into the magazine, I make myself do 150 perfect dry fire repetitions. I do them nice and slow, and I do them nice and crisp to make sure that all of my fundamentals are on point. And then once I've done my 150 dry fire repetitions, then I actually go and I make live fire and I allow myself to shoot that 50 rounds. If I'm going to shoot 100 rounds that day, I make myself do a very disciplined 300 rounds of dry fire practice. And that allows me, especially with the cost of ammunition these days, that allows me to get a lot more repetitions. So for example, if I'm on the competition circuit or if I'm on the training circuit and I'm getting ready to go teach a big class to law enforcement officers or someone in the military, I shoot 50 rounds a day, 5 days a week. So 250 rounds a week, 4 weeks out of the month for 1,000 rounds. But I'm able to get 4,000 repetitions with that because of my dedicated dry fire and my very disciplined dry fire habits.
So, what is a dry fire? Walk me through that.
Okay, so dry fire allows you to perform everything that you would do behind the gun with the exception of perhaps trigger reset, recoil management, as well as multiple target engagement. But there are devices that are out there on the market now, like the Dry Fire magazine, which is produced in Idaho. If they make it for your specific gun, it forces the trigger to reset. So it allows you to actually overcome that multiple target scenario and being able to train to multiple targets, whether that's shooting a Texas Star, shooting patterns for 6-plate rack, or shooting multiple targets in a row, multiple targets in depth. I tend to tell people that the benefit of dry fire is that it allows you to do everything that you would do behind the gun without the stress and the noise. So for people that are very, very new into shooting and they start to get conditioned by the recoil, they start to get conditioned by the noise that's generated by the recoil of the gun. It allows you to practice your draw stroke. It allows you to practice building your grip on the gun. It allows you to practice your trigger press. It allows you to practice your sight alignment and your sight picture. It allows you to practice your breathing control, right? Because we're creatures of habituation. So if every time I draw my gun, I'm holding my breath, and then I slam on the trigger, what's going to happen whenever I transition from a square range to someone's trying to change the quality of my life for the rest of my life? I'm going to do the exact same thing habitually that I would have done on the square range. So building in very specific breathing patterns and understanding that breathing is a function of our autonomic nervous system. I tend to tell people it's the first breath that kills you. So in my breathing pattern, I'm very, very specific that whenever I draw my gun from a position of concealment or draw my gun from a holster, I'm making myself take that deep breath in. As I present the gun forward, breathing out. And so if I practice that 1,000 times, and then I find myself in that critical use of force, someone's trying to change the quality of my life for the rest of my life, what am I doing habitually? I'm taking that breath. I'm saturating my eyes with oxygen. I'm expunging carbon dioxide from my body. And that helps me to make better decisions. It helps me to see things that are a lot clearer than I would. Because one of the physiological reactions to critical stress, it's very common, is tunnel vision. Whenever I was in my first agency as a law enforcement officer, we used to use simunitions, which is a conversion system or conversion kit for your pistol where you can actually shoot each other with these plastic bullets. Very similar to the idea of paintball or airsoft, but with higher consequences. Pain is a powerful motivator. And so whenever you get shot by one of these things, there's no denying that you've been shot by it. There's blue paint or orange paint all over your vest. It's probably going to leave a welt. If you're not using safety protective gear, it'll knock out a tooth. It'll put your eye out.
Wow.
And so one of the things that we used to do is we used to do the old West gunfight, right? You stand away from me 10 yards, I stand away from you 10 yards, and on the command of threat, we each draw our pistols from our holsters and we try to engage each other. Where would you venture to say most people shot each other, Steve?
I'd say most people probably missed.
If you actually hit the target.
Well, I'd say the chest is the biggest target, but
It's the hands.
the hand?
Tunnel vision. Yep. We tend to focus on that which is going to kill us. And so we typically would see people where we would have to train ourselves to break our visual plane off of that gun and actually focus on a nice fine point of aim on the chest. Yeah, pretty amazing, isn't it?
That's That's incredible. I had no idea. Wow. So do you, I take it when you are doing these dry fires that, well, okay, you basically answered that question. Let's move on. Once you've helped a student build the right foundation for safety, manners, and weapon use, what do you see as the next step in their self-defense journey?
Typically for most people, that's going to mean getting some type of a concealed handgun license. And it's very important that you do some research on the instructor that you're getting your concealed handgun license from. There are a lot of shops out there that have what we call concealed handgun license mills, where they don't really care about the quality of the education that you're getting. Certain states mandate more training hours required for your concealed carry license, as well as the upkeep of your concealed carry license. One of the most disheartening things that I see as a concealed handgun license instructor is I tend to see you for the concealed carry class because the state mandates it for your concealed carry permit, and then I never see you again. I tend to tell people, just because you have a gun, does that make me safe, right? So if you take me to Compton and you give me a gun, am I safe? No, absolutely not, right? But I tell people that your brain will get you out of more trouble than your gun ever will. So using good situational awareness building techniques, using good understanding of the decision-making models, understanding baseline, right? If you walk into a Starbucks, there are certain things that you expect to see. If you walk into a Starbucks, there are certain things that you don't expect to see. And so whenever you start seeing those things, those red flags should be going up. I can't necessarily tell you what the situation is going to look like for you in that defensive use of force. However, I can tell you that there are two statistics that ring true. Number one, these occurrences happen very close between me and you, right? So how close are you willing to let people get to you? And number two, these types of use of force incidents happen in low light to no light situations. So whenever it comes to having a defensive firearm, are you actually able to see your sights in the middle of the night? So that's why having night sights is very important.
Okay.
You'll also see that on my handgun, even whenever I'm concealed, I have a weapon-mounted flashlight that's available to me. That way I can positively identify my target, right? Something goes crash in the middle of the night at your house and you just start shooting at the noise and then you found that you've killed Fluffy.
Right, yeah, you don't know what you just hit. You have no idea.
Absolutely. So being able to positively identify that target and discriminate, like, okay, is this a true threat or is this just something that went bump in the night? That flashlight is a very, very useful tool for that. And night sights are a very, very useful tool in terms of being able to actually see your sights in low light to no light.
And you cover all this in your classes?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a very, very comprehensive curriculum. Everything from basic handgun to basic rifle to advanced shooting techniques, speed reloads, clearing malfunctions in the gun, understanding law and legal ramifications of what it takes for you to actually commit justifiable homicide, right? And the more we practice these things, the faster our decision-making process gets, right? So I mental map, I war game a lot, and that's just simply me asking these questions, like, if this happens, what am I going to do to respond to
Okay.
it, right? And the more I play those war games, whenever that situation is presented to me, it helps me to make decisions faster in that process because I've already oftentimes thought through what that's going to look like.
That's so amazing because you're saying so much that parallels with what Amanda Ripley said in her Unthinkable. I mean, the forethought, the running over in your head possible scenarios and thinking through things over and over and over again is critical for these types of situations, but not just firearms, but people who, like, say in 9/11, there was a lot of people, most people never even took a fire drill. They never did anything. And so when the actual event happened, they were standing at their desk, calling people, fidgeting on their desk or putting up books or whatever, and they died.
Yeah.
They didn't leave. So, mental awareness or thinking about these things that you don't want to think about is critical because we're not Mayberry anymore. We're just not. And I don't know if we ever were, but we're certainly not today.
Yeah.
So, thank you for joining us on the first part of our interview with Chris. For those wanting to look further into acquiring a firearm and safely using it, the links will be provided below the video on our YouTube channel and on the resource tab of acatastrophicevent.com. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment on this video. And thank you for watching.